Very good. Welcome, folks. We're going to let people get in. I'm not sure how long it's going to take for everybody to join, but we're glad you're here, and we're going to get started in just a moment. All right. All right. Well, I'm excited. We have almost 100 people that have registered, many in order to receive the recording afterwards, but we'll get going. My name is Abe Bonowitz. I'm the Executive Director of Death Penalty Action, and we're very pleased to present this opportunity to hear from Rose Vines with a sneak peek about the new, soon-to-be released and published graphic book edition of Dead Man Walking. And I want to share with you that, well, first, I want to welcome everybody that has not been to a Death Penalty Action webinar before. There's a number of new people that have registered, so we're grateful that you're with us. And we invite you, of course, to visit our webpage and sign the petitions for the upcoming executions. I'm actually handling this unexpectedly from a car with my colleague Charles Keith is here. Charles is his brother survived time on death row in Ohio and is still doing life without parole for a crime he had nothing to do with, and we're still working to get him out. That's Kevin Keith in Ohio. But we're just down the street now from the State House in Alabama, where moments ago we finished a petition delivery, tens of thousands of petitions we delivered to Governor Ivey to hopefully stop the execution of Anthony Boyd, an innocent man who's scheduled to be suffocated by gas tomorrow evening in Alabama for a crime that he did not commit. And we believe that if you look at the petition, you can read all through that. So with that, I want to welcome Rose Vines, and I've got a couple things to share. But first, welcome, Rose, and please tell us however you'd like to introduce yourself. Beyond that, I have some things I want to say too, but I'll start with you.
Okay, thanks, Abe, and thanks for everyone who's here. I noticed someone from Croatia. I'm glad you're joining us from all the way over there. Let's see. Well, you can probably guess from my accent that I'm not an American. Born in Australia, spent my first 4 decades in Australia, and then just decided to have an adventurous time, and I came to the US and ended up in the South, rather unexpectedly. I'm in New Orleans, which is a pretty it's like a little island in the South, and I've been when I got here, I looked around and I wanted to volunteer. I was here as a journalist, a technology journalist in those days, and I looked around and thought, you know, what can I volunteer for with my skills, because I was both a computer geek and a writer. And it seemed to me, coming to New Orleans, there in the South, that racism and religion and the death penalty were all big factors and all interconnected. And I knew that Sister Helen Prejean lived in New Orleans. I'd read the book, her book, Dead Man Walking. I'd seen the film, and I thought, all right, well, I'll volunteer with Helen's organization, which in those days was called the Moratorium Campaign. And so that's how I started my journey with Helen. I've been working with her full time now for, what is it? It's about 23, 24 years. And I've been, part of my job and part of what I want to do is visiting on death row at Louisiana State Penitentiary, Angola.
Thank you, Rose. I was going to ask, when did we possibly meet? And I'm not exactly sure the first time we met, but now I know. So you started with Sister Helen somewhere around 2001, 2002?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I would like to just share for a moment that I met Sister Helen maybe 89 or 90. My first National Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty conference was it was in Chicago, and Sister Helen was there speaking. And of course, this was before anybody knew of her. And it was kind of fun. Mike Radelet was there, and they had this puppet called Sister Pugilista, and that was actually a good connection to Sister Helen. She's always been a great fun, a lot of fun to be with, and also very serious. And I want to share with you two things in terms of my history with Sister Helen, which there's many different bits and pieces of it. But this is an original copy, the hardback book from the very first box, the very first time that Sister Helen saw her book. It was at the home of Bill Pelkey at the start of the very first Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing in 1993. And those of us that were there for the very beginning were there when Helen opened her first box of books. And this is a book out of that very first box, which is pretty, it's a treasure to me. And I keep thinking I should send it off to my archive because I don't want to lose it if in a flood or a burn, or my house burned down or something like that. And then the other thing I wanted to share, and maybe, I don't know if it made it into the book. Rose, you'll tell us, but Trish, can you share the photograph that I sent? And you'll see here, this is you're not even allowed to create screenshots from the film, but I streamed the film on my computer and I had to take a picture with my camera because this is a scene from the movie Dead Man Walking, which I encourage everybody to go watch again because
Looks like Abe's locked up for a moment, which happened a bit earlier, coming from the car.
oh, am I not there?
Yeah, now you're back.
Okay, good. So this is the first execution that takes place in the film. And so that's the only scene that the actual Sister Helen is in. And then that guy in the purple shirt is me in somewhere around whenever this was filmed. This is outside the gates of the prison in Angola. And Sister Helen called and said, hey, come on down to be extras for myself and Magdalena Rosa Avila, who is a dear friend of ours, who's also in this scene, not in this picture, but Trish, you can stop sharing the image now. But that's, so we've been able to work together in so many different ways. And I will tell you that, one of the amazing things about the film is that it made the book so much more popular. And in fact, it was on the New York Times bestseller list forever. And what was amazing is that Sister Helen's crowds got much, much bigger. And she was telling her story all over the world. And of course, the rest is sort of herstory, as I'd like to say. There's the film, there's the stage play, there's the opera, and not even there's a recording of an album of the soundtrack of the film, and also an accompanying album to the film with some of the music that didn't make it into the film, but it's super powerful. And now we have the graphic edition of Dead Man Walking. And that's why we're here with Rose, to not just hear from Rose and see, get a sneak peek before, it's the first time we're doing anything. Rose, I saw your post that it's the first public thing that's being done on this book, which we're also grateful and excited by. So thanks everybody for being in attendance. But when you are able to, Rose, you'll be able to share with us now everything you want to say about the book, but in particular, what I wanted to make sure people know is that my hope, my organization is called Death Penalty Action. And the whole point of it is to give people things to do to oppose the death penalty. And part of what a lot of people need is education, which is why we're moving to this graphic novel, right? It's another way to reach a whole different audience of people. And for us who are super engaged in this work, or at least peripherally engaged, if you got our emails and got an invitation to this, somehow you're engaged. What do we do? How do we help build and boost this publication, get it into more people's hands, get people using the tools that come with it? So with that, Rose, I want to turn it over to you. Share with us, please, how did this come about? What's happening now. I know there's a couple of events. I'm going to put the links into the chat for that, or information about them, and just what do people need to know about how this came to be, and what can we do about it?
Okay. Well, I'll be very happy if you have questions, Abe, or if anyone else has questions as I go along.
Of course. I'll say, please use the Q&A if you want. It's going to be harder to monitor the chat, so use the Q&A function there, please, and we'll get to you as quickly as we can. And also, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, where you're watching from, so we can know that too.
Great. So how the book came about was when Sister Helen in 2019, beginning of 2019, she was recording the audio version of Dead Man Walking. So it took a long time for that to become an audio book. And there was someone there from Random House who was the producer for the audio. And she said to Helen, is there a graphic version of the book? And Helen said, what's that? And the producer told her about it. And so she straight away Helen phoned me and said, Rose, let's do a graphic book. And I immediately assumed that I was going to write it. I knew that Helen didn't have the time to do it. And also Helen is a fabulously focused person, but she's not good at seeing what's going on outside her focus. So one of my mantras, I've been the techie with the Ministry Against the Death Penalty for many years, and I've been training in computer and social media and getting Helen into that. And one of my mantras for Helen has been look at the whole screen, because I'll say, she'll ring me and say, oh, I can't do this, it won't stop doing such and such, and I'll say, well, you see that big button that says close? You click that. And she says, what? Where is it? And I'll say, right over there in the center of the screen. Oh, so Helen is not good at seeing past her focus. And I think that's why she's so successful, because she is so committed to ending the death penalty and is so focused on it. She has maintained that commitment for all these decades. But I knew that a graphic book was not going to be something that she would be comfortable creating. So I assumed I was going to write it. I didn't know anything really about graphic books either. I'd read a couple, but not many. I hadn't immersed myself. So Helen and I went off to our local Barnes and Noble and sat down in the graphic book section, surrounded by all sorts of Vias for Vengeance and a whole wall of manga, and we started to immerse in it. And what we realized was there were two things that the book needed. We needed to decide from the start. Was one, we had to find an illustrator, and maybe Trish. Oh no, I'll get to that in a minute. But we had to find an illustrator, but we also had to decide how the book was going to be structured. And with the play and the movie and the opera, all three of them took Helen's story, which was of accompanying two men to their executions at Angola. They took that story and they turned those two men into one man. And it was very helpful for Tim Robbins, who wrote the screenplay. It was an artistic choice, but it also helped the audience understand it. It would have been quite complex doing the two and making that a story in the time frame of a movie. And it worked beautifully, and it works beautifully in the opera. If you haven't seen the opera, and if you're not an opera person, this is a good opera to go and see. It's incredibly dramatic. and that one character version has worked well for those purposes. But I really wanted to tell Helen's story, which is of accompanying two men, and they're two very different men. And there were a couple of reasons why I wanted to do it that way. One is these men, Patrick Sonnier, who was the first man she accompanied to death, is easy to like. You can feel compassion for it. Robert Lee Willie, who is the second man, is a much harder guy to take. And so if we'd just done Patrick Sonnier, it sort of, is easy to do the anti-death penalty case. When you have someone like Robert Lee Willie, people will need to struggle with how they feel, whether they're for executing him or against executing him. And we want to make it difficult. We want people to have to make their own struggle and decision when reading the book. I also felt that conflating the two characters, the two people, fictionalizes it in a way. And I didn't want this to be a fiction book. We call it, Helen hates the word graphic novel because it isn't a novel. But it's hard to come up with a good word for graphic nonfiction. So that's why it's called Dead Man Walking Graphic Edition. That's what Random House decided on. So the graphic edition. It's not a novel, and we have worked very, very hard in how we've done the book to make sure that people realize this is a true story. It's not something made up. It's what happens in this country. And so I didn't want to conflate those two characters. And there was another reason for doing that, keeping them the two men, is to honor the victims and the victims' families, because that conflated character is not who took their lives or took the lives of the loved one. And, they can, I think it's far more respectful to actually give the people, this is the man who did this. This is the other man who did these other murders. So anyway, so I decided to go that route. And so our version of Dead Man Walking, and I guess I should show you it, is the full story from Sister Helen's Dead Man Walking. And the other structural decision, and I might get Trish to put up the first image that we have from the book. So the other thing is, Helen started going to Angola in 1982. The executions she witnessed, these first two executions she witnessed, were 1983, 1984. The book came out in 1993, the film in 1995. So a lot of the information in it is actually outdated. And we wanted to find a way to make it relevant to now, because our main audience is people who've never heard of Sister Helen Prejean, or never heard of Dead Man Walking. When I first came to the US, which was in 1996, everyone knew Dead Man Walking because it was the year Susan Sarandon won the Oscar for her portrayal of Sister Helen. So everyone knew. And now, if you talk to most people under about 30 or 40, they don't know anything about Dead Man Walking. So I had to look for a way to bring the book and bridge that gap. And we created a couple of marginal characters. The owl, who's called the Owracle, and the ant, whom Sister Helen dubbed Pissant. And the Owracle is the character that brings what we call future history into the book. So the Owracle often will sit around and give you a statistic that was happening when Helen was writing an experience and what that is now, how it works now. the Oracle brings in modern forms of execution, like lethal injection, which were not available then. The 2 executions that Helen witnessed were in the electric chair, by electric chair. And the little pissant, so you can see them both checking Helen out there. The little pissant was really just there to add sarcastic humor, mordant comments. And if you go on to the next slide, Trish, yeah, that we had one other sort of marginal character, and that's Albert Camus, who wrote the book Reflections on the Guillotine. And Helen quotes a lot of Camus in Dead Man Walking. And we wanted to have him sort of lurking around, having little conversations with her as a way of doing that, rather than quoting slabs in the panels. So you can see Albert there outlined in blue, and his speech bubbles are in blue. And so he was the 3rd marginal character. You can get rid of that one now, or stop screen sharing right now. I don't know if any of you remember Mad Magazine. And one of the things I loved about Mad Magazine were those little drawn out dramas in the margins. Like you'd have to look for them, and they'd be all over the magazine. They were these little beautiful little cartoons in those magazines. So that was my original idea of marginals, and how Catherine, our illustrator, took them. She put them more into the page than being marginals. So you'll see all 3 of those characters all the way through the book. Unfortunately, not as much Albert Camus as I would have liked, because the copyright restrictions on using his words are ferocious, and we got stuck without being able to do quite a lot of. We had to cut it by half right at the end, which was tragic, I felt. But he's still there, and you'll find him in blue throughout the book. Let's see, I'm trying to see what my other images are that I have that I want to put up. Yeah. So if you go on to the next couple of images, Trish, so number 3 to start with. So this is an image of Helen's first visit with Patrick Sonnier. So this is the first time Helen has visited anyone on death row. And her words on seeing him, or her thought on seeing him, is, oh my God, he's a human being. She had no idea what to expect. And you can see, I think, by the way Catherine has drawn him, that you can already think this is a man who's having his own suffering. And I think Patrick actually attempted suicide because he was so grief-stricken at what he'd done. And so that's Patrick Sonnier. So he's the one who it's easier to feel compassion for. If you do the next one, Trish. And this is Robert Lee Willie. In the movie, he was played by Sean Penn, who did a fantastic job. And the character in the movie is probably closer to Robert Lee Willie than to Patrick Sonnier. And he was very racist. He was very cruel. He thought of himself as an outlaw. And one of the things I want to point out to you on this image is the police records that are on the bottom 2/3 of that page. Those are actual police records, Robert Lee Willie's police records. There are many more of them. There were a stack of them. And we were fortunate to have access to Sister Helen Prejean's archives, which are held at DePaul University. And I've spent many, many days in those archives, and we got to use some amazing, first resources, original sources for material. And that's really important when you're wanting to make sure that people know this is not a novel, that it's real life. It's great to have those sorts of documents, and we have many such things throughout the book. So so the next thing, this is really about structure, and the other thing what we really need to do was get an illustrator. And I really had no idea how to go about that, but I just started reading lots of books, looking at the art styles, and I looked at, the Nate Powell, who did March. Do any of you know March? That's the trilogy by Congressman John Lewis. Fantastic series. Nate Powell did that, and Nate Powell has also done a graphic version of Lies My Teacher Told Me. So looked at his stuff. He's often very realistic, and I thought at first that that's what we needed, some realism, especially if we're grounding this story. But talking, and I came across someone, if we go to the next one, Trish, which is Catherine, here we go. I came across this book, Heart of Darkness. It's Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, illustrated by a woman who in those days was Catherine Ann Yango. She is now Catherine Ann Yango Grunewald. And I came across this book and I loved it. And I have to say, when I did Heart of Darkness at school, studied it, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't have any understanding of the context of colonialism and imperialism, and it wasn't taught in that way. It was taught as a sort of piece of literature, and it's very dense. His prose is very dense, Conrad's. But when I saw this book, you could go on to the next image, Trish. I was just amazed by the illustrations, but Catherine's illustrations are often, she can do very realistic things, but they're often sort of phantasmagorical and a bit out there.
Rose,
Yep.
can I interrupt you for just a moment to say that there's at least one person who is blind in the audience. So if you might, when it makes sense, kind of describe a little bit what the image is briefly.
Sure.
I think Randy would appreciate that. And also there was one question so far, which was just what age groups do you think that this should be targeted to, or is there any that should be restricted? How young can you go? Let's put it like.
I'll answer that question about age. I think 15 and up is probably good age for it. We're certainly going to be spending a lot of time in universities, talking and doing classes with the book, but also high schools. It does start with rape and murder, and I think it's good if it goes into classrooms, if teachers are aware and allow people to not witness those things. But yeah, so that's the general age, 15 and up, and no top limit. So this picture is shows us three main images, the ones I want. And so in the Heart of Darkness, you have Kurtz, who has been getting tusks, ivory tusks, and you've got one panel where the landscape is full of ivory tusks with people holding them. Below that is a line of rifle shells, and then below that is a line of chained African men with the the words above it, they adore him, as in they adore the man who has chained them up. And just those three parallel images are amazing. And it's all black and white and greys, lots of shades of grey. So that's what's in that image. So I saw Catherine's book, and I thought, I love this. I'm not sure if it's a bit too surreal, that style for what we're trying to do. But I talked with our agent, and she said that, looking at the graphic book market, the things that people really go for, especially for young people, tend to be more fantasy, science fiction, quite a lot of surreal images in them. And I thought, well, that could be a good way to get young people to pick it up, and then we can use many other things to ground it. But when I went looking for Catherine, her website wasn't working, and so I contacted her. I managed to track her down on Twitter, and I said, I noticed your website isn't working, and the reason why I'm looking at your website is because I'm working with Sister Helen Prejean on this book. And I said, and looked at it, so I'm not sure if it's right. And she said, I understand, but she said, if there's any way I can help, just let me know. So we had a Zoom, Helen and Catherine and I. And if anyone, well, a bunch of you know Helen. Helen just assumed that Catherine was going to say yes to doing the project. And so the conversation went that way. And Catherine was carried along, which was really fortunate for us. And she came on board. I think you can stop sharing for a little minute. And came on board, and that was 2019, fairly early in 2019. And I'm sure she didn't realize it was going to be a 6-year project. She had a 1-year-old daughter at the time, and she's a lecturer at a university in Stockholm. Very busy career, and of course we were just about to enter into COVID time, so that delayed things a lot. But it sort of shut down quite a lot of the publishing community too. So we spent 6 years together working on this book. And now you could go on to the next slide, which is number 7, the opening. And you can see this is not by Catherine. This is mine. This is when I was trying to figure out how to do it, and as well as immersing myself in graphic books, I'd also tried to immerse myself in books about comics and how to make them, how to do them. And the traditional way for a script writer is to write panel by panel. This happens in this panel, this happens in the next panel. So in this draft, on the left-hand side, we have just one panel, and then on the right-hand side, we have multiple panels. And so on the left-hand side, I'll read it out because this is actually how Helen's book starts. It says, I've heard there are 2 situations that make interesting stories: when an extraordinary person is plunged into the commonplace, and when an ordinary person gets involved in extraordinary events. And my little image has a whole bunch of little circles signifying a crowd, and the circle in the middle has a crucifix around her neck. So that's Helen lurking there. And then on the next page, so this is a spread. So in comics, you work in spreads. So instead of page by page, it's spread. So this is the first spread. And then in the next one, we've got Helen saying, I'm an example of the latter. I stepped from a middle-class environment, and so we've got little panels that illustrate this, and into one of the most explosive issues of our time, capital punishment. So that was how I was laying out how I was going to start. We actually ended up starting in a different way, but this was going to be the beginning of the first chapter. And you could see that it's very fortunate that I did not illustrate the book. If we go on to the next slide, this is what Catherine did with that. So on the left, we have newspaper clippings about the murder that Patrick Sonnier and his brother Eddie did. And it has the text. I've heard that there are two situations that make interesting stories. And then on the right side of the spread, we've got two panels, and it's with the same text. And in the top panel, we see Helen in her home, surrounded with books. She's got a green armchair, very simple chair, and she's holding some books. And you'll notice that lurking on the bookshelf is the Oracle, just sitting there. And then the bottom panel is another green chair, but it's in a room with brick walls, surrounded by brick walls, and it's an empty electric chair with the mask that gets put over their head, just resting on it, and the straps that strap them in. So that's not quite how it begins. We actually begin with the murders, but that's the start of the first chapter, and it really follows what Helen did. Helen wrote in her book. So I'm just seeing what I've got up for you next. So those illustrations, the newspaper clippings are real newspaper clippings. So wherever possible, we used original sources and dug through the archives, both at DePaul and LSU, and through libraries, and Helen had some materials too still in her office. And you'll notice that throughout the book, often these newspaper clippings are in layers. They're layered one over another, so you can't see everything that was written there. You can see a lot of it, and part of that is artistic, but part of it is copyright, because if we just had the clippings each by themselves, each time that becomes a copyright issue. Like we had about 400 things that we had to check for copyright, and layering them like this makes them into artworks, art representations, and that's permissible use. Let's go on to the next one, Trish. So this is Helen, and this photo is the first photo that she sent to Patrick Sonnier when she started writing to him. She wrote him a letter, and she enclosed 3 photos, or 2 postcards and a photo. They wouldn't allow him to get the postcards for some reason. There are lots of rules in prisons, and but this photo, they permitted. So this we got from, actually I think it was from Helen directly. It hadn't gone to the archives yet, but it's now in the archives. And if we do look at the next slide, Trish, so I forgot to say that picture that we were looking at was a very young Helen sitting on a pony, looking rather happy. And then this one has the words, "As I seal the envelope, I think of the 2 young people, David LeBlanc and Loretta Burke, whom Pat has stolen from their families." And we have a picture of a desk, Helen's hands, an envelope, and that little picture of the pony is going into the envelope. And the envelope shadow that it casts are bars, and the shape of the envelope is actually similar to the shape of the entrance to Angola, Louisiana State Penitentiary. So there's lots going on in that. That's just one panel from a page. But one of the things I wanted to emphasize is how carefully we researched what we were doing and how often we tried to ground the book through using actual images and actual documents. And so that's another example of that. Let's see what else. So it was fantastic working with Catherine, and it was quite a learning process for me. She'd already done a couple of graphic books by that time, and I hadn't. I was a graphic virgin, so I learned a lot as I was working with her, and it's amazing now when maybe if you stop screen sharing for a moment, but now I'll just show you a page. Here's one page. We can see the oracle up there. Now, even though I've been working on this book for six years, I will look at a page and suddenly realize there's something in there that I had missed every single time I've looked at it, because there's so much depth and so many things that get carried across from one page to another, to another, to another. If you get the chance to go to one of our launch events in New York or in New Orleans, when Catherine will be out here with us, you'll get to hear her and talk about how she uses images, and it's just fascinating. So it was great working with her, and I'd learnt that no, I'm not to do panel by panel description, because she would know how she wants to portray things. So what I was doing was writing the script, which was narration and dialogue, plus a lot of ideas about what might be a good thing to represent on the page, plus a lot of research. So I'd be collecting images and documents and all sorts of things and saying, here's fodder for you, and if you like this idea, go this way, but if there's something else you'd like to bring out, bring it out. And so, quite often we'd agree with the sort of images we'd like, but usually I was surprised in a really, really good way. So Trish, if you do the next one, which is the, 11. So Catherine and I both did hundreds and hundreds of hours of research. We each did our own stuff, and she has her notebooks and sometimes if she had to draw Helen driving through the Louisiana woods, she would spend hours doing just pictures of leaves until she came on the type she wanted to use, drawing those in her notebooks. And I'd spend hours trying to come up with visual ideas for things that were quite complex to explore. And there's a whole 5-spread section in the book, which is a lot of spreads to just devote to one thing, about the Eighth Amendment and cruel and unusual punishment. And when I was thinking about this, I thought about, and the arc of the Eighth Amendment is, getting better a bit through the 20th century, and then a plummet in how it's applied now, with cruelty being just about fine for the majority on the Supreme Court. So when I was thinking about this, I was thinking about Um, John Bunyan's The Pilgrim's Progress. I don't know if anyone's read that. A very old book, but it was about a pilgrim traveling through, as you can see in this image, it's a map. We've got this image as an old map, and it's showing the city of destruction and the Slough of Despond, and Mount Sinai, which has morality written beside it. And it's all sorts of things about a journey from someone trying to get to the celestial gates. And there are lots of different maps of the Pilgrim's Progress, old maps. And I found all these old maps and I thought, it's a bit like this. It's almost like a reverse Pilgrim's Progress with how the Eighth Amendment has gone over the 20th and 21st century, because these days it's cruelty. I just don't know how the US Supreme Court can thinks of cruelty. It's unimaginable what they permit. But anyway, what I'm really trying to show you with this is I spent days and days researching this and handed it all over to Catherine with the script for that section and with, just the whole thing there. I said, this is an idea, see what you think. So I give Catherine the Pilgrim's Progress, going from destruction to celestial gates. And if we go on to the next slide, Catherine gives me bobblehead justices on a shelf interspersed with owls and ants and other images. So, which was completely not in my mind, and it's absolutely wonderful. It's this 5 spreads of this where we go through the key decisions that have affected the Eighth Amendment implementation from the late 19th century all the way through till pretty much today. So this image, we've got this green wallpaper which has a variety of different owls in it, and the ant is walking on the wallpaper, and there's another ant on the ledge where the bobblehead dolls are. This is the 4th of 5 spreads, and it's the oracle giving a lesson to the pissant about the Eighth Amendment and what does cruel and unusual actually mean. And so along the bottom we've got some of the key decisions that were made, so and some of the key events that have affected things, like the execution of Joseph Wood in 2014, that it took him 2 hours to die from the lethal injection, and then 2015 Glossop v. Gross, which is I feel one of the Supreme Court's most egregious decisions, where they essentially say you've got to prove, the prisoner has to bring with them an alternative method. So if they're saying the method you're going to use is cruel because it's painful, you have to say, well, the state has this other available method that is demonstrably less painful. So it's a sort of do it yourself, bring your own death. And what Alito says, and we've got a bobblehead Alito, is that because the Eighth Amendment allows for execution, therefore there must be a constitutional way to execute people, and to carry it out. There has to be a way. So, and what Sonia Sotomayor, bobblehead, says, and these are quotes directly from their decisions, is that a method, the decision means a method of execution that is intolerably painful, even to the point of being the chemical equivalent of burning alive, will, the court holds, be unconstitutional if and only if there is a known and available alternative method of execution. So it's a horrible decision, and we're living with it now. And so when you get into the book, look for this 5-spread section on the Eighth Amendment, and as you can see, this is actually not what was in Helen's book. Some of the early decisions were, but a lot of the jurisprudence on this has happened since her book came out. So this was one of the ways we were bridging the story into the present. So, and then I'll just do 2 more images. The next one, Trish, it's about how the book begins and ends. So Helen, when she wrote the book, she sent it to her brilliant editor, who said, you don't talk about the victims until way too late in the book. And he said, unless you have the murders right up the front, everyone's just going to think this is a bleeding heart liberal nun, and they're not going to read your book. And so she moved the murders right up the front, and we have them at the very front. There's I think it's 5 spreads with no words, but just the crime of Patrick Sonnier and his brother Eddie Sonnier of taking this young couple who are in a lover's lane, taking them into their car, driving them off, raping the girl, and then murdering both of them. So that's how the book starts. And then if we go to the next slide, how it ends is with the father of one of those young kids who was killed, Lloyd LeBlanc. And Helen has always said that Lloyd LeBlanc is the hero of the book, and that he was her teacher. And Lloyd LeBlanc worked so hard to not let revenge and bitterness grind him down and take his life away from him, as his son's life had been taken. And so this very last page in the book is about Lloyd LeBlanc imagining his son David as a very young man, as a young adult, as an older man, all the things that he'd missed getting to enjoy with his son. But he also talks about forgiveness. And he says that right from the moment he was in the field where he'd gone to see his dead son's body, that he immediately prayed for the people who had done it. So he is the hero of the story, and so we begin with the story with the victims, and we end with the victim's family. And Helen had a really hard journey when she was going through this, to understand how she needed to reach out to victims' families. And it took her a while, and it was a very humbling experience for her. Yeah, so I'm going to end there because I've been rambling on for a long time. So I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Rose. This is fascinating, and we're so grateful for this sneak peek into this book, and for making time for this. There are no questions currently. You've answered the ones that we had, or I answered people in the chat. We will be sending out a link to this conversation along with the links that I shared. And we invite questions now. If you haven't this time, please put it in the Q&A, which is the little button on the bottom with a question mark in it. And I'm going to just share my screen for a moment and show folks the question that we also want to talk about is what do we do? How do we make sure that the more people know about this? And I'm sharing the email that I got the other day from you, your Substack, which is, the newest way people are getting the word out. Death Penalty Action is actually launching a Substack as well. But in any case, and I put this in the link, the the Bibliophile podcast, The Reading Life. So that's in the chat. We'll be sending it out again. There's also so we sent that link out. There's also a link to the New York event. There wasn't a link, I don't think. And here you can see a picture of all three: Sister Helen and Rose and Catherine, and what they look like, and then that's the Fordham event, and then of course there's the New Orleans book launch, which is on November 13th, and I don't think that there's a link to that. I didn't see one, so we'll just send this graphic out when we email all this out to people, and then of course there's a book tour page. I didn't send that link yet, but we'll send that out, and. So I wanted to share that, and then what's important here is why the book is important, and what we need to do with it. And here are some of the things that people can do, which is, ask your library to put it on their shelves, go to your local bookstore on publication day and buy a copy. I love that you're asking people to go to their local, hopefully independent bookstore, and appreciate that they have it. If you find it on the shelf in your bookstore, you can of course order it online, and there's a way to buy multiple copies if people want. So there's some of the things, and the other thing that I would suggest is also, get the book, read it, and share it in your social media or with your book club or whatever it is. Tell people this exists. Invite people to go back and watch the film, which you can stream online. I watched it on Amazon Prime. There's several other places where you can watch it. I've got a DVD of it somewhere, but I don't have a way to play DVDs anymore. So, there's that. But I'm still looking. I don't see any more questions. So let's see here. Yes, Nadia is suggesting buy it from your local bookstore. Um, So the other thing I wanted to share with people is, before we close, is just that if you're new, if you've not been to anything that Death Penalty Action does or haven't heard about us before, I put a link to our webpage in the chat. We make sure that there's a way for people to protest and express their opposition to every single execution. And on top of that, we also host a live virtual vigil that brings people together via Zoom, shares onto social media, but there's usually a steady audience. Many of you that are in the audience today are regulars. Where we're together, we hear normally from experts on the death penalty, leaders from the state where the execution is happening. Rob Dunham from the Death Penalty Policy Project is a regular that helps us all, kind of takes us to law school on the death penalty, and helps us understand what's happening. And in addition, it depends on the prisoner and what the relationships we have with that person or their loved ones or pen pals and all that. But we try always to have a connection to the prisoner to help understand them. We of course always remember the victims' families and the victims themselves. And there's multi-faith prayer that happens in conjunction also with the just political commentary, not politics, but the recognition of what's happening in today's court system and government, and how we get to the place where it's so egregious. For example, tomorrow night in Alabama, they're executing a person who is in all likelihood innocent. And how does this happen? So we're going to be talking about those things. And of course, also tomorrow night, we'll be waiting for the execution to be over to hear from Reverend Dr. Jeff Hood, who is the spiritual advisor for Anthony Boyd, and he'll come out and share what it was like in those final moments. So it's a powerful opportunity to be together, and I'm also grateful, Rose, to be together with you in an event where we're not directly about some horrific execution that's about to happen. So in any case, that's I see a question in the Q&A. Um, oh, Krista is saying, does everyone know that the bookshop.org pays 10% of every purchase to local bookstores via their shared revenue pool? Thank you very much. So $40 million in the past 5 years. That's great. I also, one of the links I put in the chat was to we've got a project that Death Penalty Action came up with a book list, and it's shared through it's called the Luigi book list, and some of the money goes to help pay for a guy that's facing the death penalty at the federal level, to help his legal fees. So there's lots of different ways to engage and to do this. And yes, Nicole is saying in the chat that Anthony Boyd is being murdered because Alabama wants to lynch a black man. Yes, and he's being killed also because they don't want to admit that they made a mistake. And in fact, I'll just say that there are 4 co-defendants. Anthony is the only one that has an alibi, but his lawyer didn't represent that in court. And the guy that ended up testifying against everybody and wrongly implicating Anthony because he got a deal has been free since 2009. This crime happened in 1993. Anthony's been facing execution for 32 years now and will likely be killed. Anyway, we can go through this with each of the executions. And I'll also just add that this will be the 40th execution this year. And Rose, you've talked about this too. In all of 2024, there were 25 executions. Well, we hit that mark in 2025 by the end of June. And we're on our way now to as many executions as we haven't seen in this country since 2012 or maybe even 2010. So we'll see where it goes. But that's the space that we're in and why it's so important that we do the work, but also that we are able to find ways to engage with people and educate people about this issue. That's the power of the Dead Man Walking graphic novel and the entire suite of Dead Man Walking stuff that's out there. We still need a Sister Helen bobblehead, I think. Does one exist?
I don't think so.
Okay, well, we'll have to figure that out before it gets too late. So I want to thank Trish Cooper, who's in the background showing us the pictures,
Yeah,
and
thanks, Trish.
and regularly beats me into submission with the things that I forget to do or don't do in time and all that. So thank you, Trish, and everybody. Then Charles is over here napping. We drove overnight to be here in Alabama. We delivered your petitions to the governor's office today after a big rally, by the way, with a whole group of people and the filmmaker that made the film, The Alabama Solution, which is brand new and on HBO, talks about prison conditions in Alabama prison. So we had a rally together. It was amazing. And you can probably find stuff about that in the news and in our social media later on. And I will just take one more moment to share our webpage just so we can see what that looks like, and probably we'll close out with a film or a short. Well, no, we'll just let you go, but I'm just going to share this real quick. Yeah, so this is the web page, and this is where you can find right at the top the petitions for the upcoming executions here in Alabama and in Florida, and then there's more executions. You click on this and you can find petitions for every execution that is currently actually scheduled. You should know, if you look at other pages, they list dates that are set but are not considered real. We list only the real dates. And of course, this is where you can find some of our campaigns and more information and short films. And I want to draw your attention especially to the People versus the Death Penalty, which are on our YouTube page. And you've got just in this picture, 2 death row survivors, Suzanne Bosler, who's a co-founder of the Journey of Hope from Violence to Healing, and actually in the audience today. Hi, Suzanne. And then Ron McAndrew, who's a former warden who executed the last 3 people, conducted the last 3 electric chair executions before realizing how terrible that was for him and leaving that work and joining our movement. So take a look at all that. And Rose, I want to leave the final word to you. Oh, here Laurie is asking what our YouTube page. You can find a link to it right at the bottom of the web page. It's ours is Death Penalty Action. All of our stuff. Just search Death Penalty Action, whatever platform you're on, and you'll find us. Rose, do you want to share whatever resources from Death Penalty Ministries?
Sisterhelen.org is our main one. We do have a website for the book itself, which is just gdmw.org. So that's Graphic Dead Man Walking. So gdmw.org. It's we really hope to get the book out there because when Helen wrote this book and it became a film, the support for the death penalty in Louisiana was in the 90%. It was 80% nationally. And even though these executions are happening this year, support for the death penalty amongst the public is really low. And we're hoping that it'll go much lower with all our work, and including getting the book out there and getting it to young people who today are facing so many assaults on human rights and civil rights that I think it's fertile ground for understanding they're all linked in. How we treat the least of us is expanding. The least of us are expanding greatly in how they're treated so poorly. So, yeah.
Well, Rose, we've seen each other here and there. I thought I saw you at the execution in Louisiana last
Yeah,
year. Yeah, and if you called out to me and I didn't hear you, I apologize, but my mind was somewhere else. And of course, I'm wearing hearing aids and don't always hear what's happening around me. So, but we were there together, and we're together in this work. So just the contributions that you have made, being so many times behind the scene, lifting up Sister Helen and increasing her capacity is, you're a hero to me, and I'm grateful for your friendship and that we got to do this together today.
Thanks so much, Abe. So good to see you.
So thank you all for being with us, and of course, thank you. So thanks everybody. Thanks Trish, and we'll see you all next time. Make it a great day.